Welcome to the podcast, Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite. I'm Dr. Laura Sokola, your host, founder of Vocal Impact Productions, and author of Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice. My guest today is Joe Chott, Senior Vice President of Private Banking at Brown Brothers Harriman, one of the oldest and largest privately held banks in the United States. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Now, tell us a little bit about Brown Brothers Harriman. What's your 30-second elevator pitch?
Great, thanks. Well, I think you hit one of the highlights up front, but we've been around for over 200 years. We're one of the largest privately held banks in the country. We're actually still a private partnership, which a lot of our competitors were at some point before they all kind of started going public and getting into other things. So today we have a couple main businesses, but the one that I'm primarily involved in is working with privately held businesses, endowments, foundations, and kind of handling anything around their investment management, financial planning, or just sort of general advice.
Nice. So then with all of that, what is your favorite part of your job and why?
It's a great question. My favorite part of the job is just getting to interact with some of the most successful and interesting people in the country. I mean, as I mentioned, we deal a lot with privately held businesses, and we get to deal with folks that you would know. I mean, they're some of the largest businesses in the country, successful, public company executives, and just sort of hearing their stories, their struggles, how they were successful, and then kind of getting to know them on an intimate, personal level, helping them with some things in their family or just sort of their personal finances. It's a really interesting job, and every single day is different.
That's actually, ironically, one of the things I love most about mine is the range of people that I get to talk to on things like the podcast here. And let me tell you, there are no 2 days that are the same. That is for sure. Now, what's something that's coming up in your company or in the industry that's exciting to you right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more exciting things that are going on out there that's a big change and a difference is ESG, which is environmental, social governance investing. It's really about bringing people's personal beliefs and and their values and what's important to them, kind of marrying it with their investment strategy. And that has been a huge trend over the last few years, and I think it's only continuing to grow. Part of that is, politics and kind of people's personal beliefs. A lot of that is blending into how they approach managing their investments, how they sort of set up their family, whether it's trusts or just sort of basic financial planning. And that is a big trend in our industry.
So in concrete terms, hypothetically, for people who are looking to invest their money for their own value later on, if they also happen to have a passion in the environment or in, animals or in fuel or in whatever it is that they can, developing countries, et cetera, they can choose to invest more specifically in those areas because they feel like it's not only good for themselves economically, but it is good to help promote these causes that they happen to be passionate about at the same time.
That's exactly right. And it sort of takes on two different flavors. It could be, a negative screen where I don't want to invest in fossil fuels because I believe in climate change and I don't want to support, the fossil fuel companies that are acting against my wishes. Or it could be positive. I want to support, venture activity that's going to help bring clean water to inner cities, or both. And it could be a wide variety in between. And so that we're getting a lot of questions, particularly around some of our larger family clients, our younger clients that might have different values than the previous generation. And so that's a big trend in our industry, and it's exciting.
Now, you mentioned that there's quite the range there between, of course, those who are super environmentally conscious, and there are those who want to support the fossil fuel industry versus the older generations and the younger generations and how they differ politically and philosophically. So that's a lot of wide variety in audiences that you have to, in some way, provide the same kind of service to. And in order to do that, how do you have to adjust your messaging when you're talking to those different groups?
I think it's a great question. It's something that, I go into every one of these conversations thinking about. I think it's You have to first start out by kind of knowing your audience, and that's not always as easy as you might think. I mean, you may not know, particularly when you start meeting people for the first time, what their beliefs are. You don't know. And so I think, you first have to kind of present everything in a very neutral way unless you really know where they're coming from. And so, for an example, if I knew someone was very, supportive of higher taxes, supportive of, paying their fair share, let's say, not to use a political term, but that I would go into that conversation differently. I would be less, and I have been less interested in pushing more tax efficient, planning or tax efficient strategies, sort of creating my wealth planning message around other things. I might emphasize more values or more, next generation things, or I may decide to emphasize more of, the environmental or, impact investing I mentioned earlier. And so, first I try and be very neutral. And then if I know where they're coming from, I'll tailor my message accordingly. But it's not always as easy as it sounds. It can be very challenging.
Sure. I can imagine that it might be counterintuitive for a lot of people. Even, I know when I think about preparing my own taxes, let me rephrase that. I do not prepare my own taxes, but getting ready to pay taxes in April, et cetera, that, you of course I expect to pay my fair share, but I don't want to pay more than is necessary. I want to invest it where possible. But if your natural tendency for many people is to minimize tax burden of sorts, and I don't mean, overly cheap, whatever, but again, not pay more than is necessary. And others are thinking, no, I don't want you to, it would be strange to hear someone say back to me, actually, I'm not trying to minimize my taxes. I believe it's my responsibility to pay as much as is necessary because I'm more successful. I mean, that's a beautiful concept from their sense of generosity, but it would be counterintuitive from a personal financial planning kind of perspective. That would throw me off, I have to admit.
Yeah. And I don't want to give you the wrong impression. We're not going out there pushing for people to pay more. It's just more of understanding.
No, but if that's what they say that they want to do, that they're not trying to pay less, as it were.
Yeah, I would say it's more about what to emphasize and sort of where your priorities go. I mean, you have some that are very tax sensitive, and you have some that are not. And I think it's more about when you think about when I kind of consider how am I going to approach a situation or a particular conversation, it's sort of what am I thinking about emphasizing? What am I going to start with, lead with, go deep on, and what am I going to kind of make a lower priority? And so to me, that's more where it is versus, we're not going in there saying you should pay more. It's more about what you're emphasizing.
Sure. And that's a great way to frame just about everything that we do. When you're having a conversation with somebody, what do you emphasize? What's most important to them? What do they need to hear? What do they need to hear you say? So what is it that you're emphasizing? I think that's a great takeaway from this. So in order to do that, as far as your own skill set is concerned, what do you think is something that you're really good at communication wise? And on the flip side, what's something you wish you were better at?
Yeah, I think I do a pretty good job building relationships with people pretty quickly. It's basically what I do for a living, and so you have to sort of quickly be able to try and build rapport, just try and get to know somebody, build a relationship there. I think that's something that I've learned to do over time. What can I improve on? I think it's a couple things when it comes time to actually, getting into it. Maybe the elevator pitch. I'm going to go back and edit that, but that's something I've always tried to tweak and think about. Okay, what's most relevant to the broadest audience, and it's something that I tweak every day. I think about every day how I'm going to change that differently. So maybe we can follow up, Laura, and you can help me with that.
It is funny because the elevator pitch, it's often the things that are the simplest that are the most difficult, because simple doesn't necessarily mean easy. And I can't tell you how many times I've been to networking events or working with clients on how to do their own elevator pitch. And these are people who run multi-gazillion dollar companies, and they're going, yeah, my elevator pitch. How do I tell people what I do? And I even struggle with the same thing. It's what I do for a living. I'm great at helping others do it. But for me to get nice and concise, exactly what I do and the value prop and whatnot in that 30 seconds or less, it is a challenge. So I think it's something we could all stand to work on. Often what's the expression? The cobbler's kids have no shoes. So my cobbler's kids have no verbal shoes to work on here. But what about role models? who's somebody that you have admired as a communication role model and why?
Yeah, so I would say that given what I do, that's more of a complex selling. I tend to admire people that can take incredibly, complex concepts or ideas and make them simple, or kind of express them in a simple way that everybody can understand. So it's going to be cliche for an investment professional, but Warren Buffett is a great example. If anybody's interested in investing, reads his shareholder letters, listens to him answer questions, he uses stories, anecdotes, expresses incredibly complex concepts in a very simple way. So that would be one. I would also add our chief investment strategist, Scott Clemens. If any of our clients have heard him, does a great job kind of doing the same thing at a local level for our clients. And then the last I would say, as a Villanova graduate, is Jay Wright. I think he does a great job, not necessarily the complex, but more just sort of expressing a strategy, a culture, and really making everybody in the community feel part of it. So from a communications, those are some good ones to model.
Absolutely. Now, I'm curious if for everybody knows the name Warren Buffett. I think that's a pretty common one. I don't know that people would have thought to look into his those newsletters for stories and to look at him as an ideal storyteller. Not that people would necessarily have heard him speak. They just, I think, know the name. It's something that you could check off a list as something you've heard of, but have you listened to him? That's different. Is there an easy link or an easy way to find, other than just sort of a Google search, to get some examples of his stories?
Oh, there are countless. I mean, a Google search, you'll get a lot of hits, and it's pretty much all free. There are books. If you go on Amazon, there are books that will categorize all of his shareholder letters and writings over the years. But if a simple Google search, you'll get most of them.
All right, everybody. So that's an interesting role model for us all to look at, because storytelling, I think, is one of the finest arts and science combinations in communications. So, and hey, if you can find somebody who's good at it, so much the better. Go listen, see what hits you and what you can learn from them. Thank you for sharing that one. It's a great little extra nugget in there. Now, what about you and having to shift your own speech style? We talked about it a little bit when you've got all of these people with different political backgrounds, et cetera, or I shouldn't say backgrounds, but preferences and how it may influence the way that they want to invest their money. But how have you had to learn to shift your style to connect with different groups of whatever sort? And was it hard to adapt in some of these ways while still feeling like, you're being yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. So maybe I'll shift a little bit, because we already talked about the prior example.
Sure.
Our business is generally an older business, so people that do what I do are generally older. So throughout my career, I've been on the younger side from an age standpoint, and that most of the clients and people we were talking to were generally older than I was. And so, from a style standpoint, from an authenticity standpoint, it was a lot of trying to kind of communicate, and for the person on the other side of the table to kind of say, well, you're my grandson's age, or and it was almost dismissive, and it was true. I was, even though we had different experiences, they looked at that as a negative, and so it took a long time to kind of shift my thinking around. And as I've gotten more experience, some of that's gone away, but it definitely caused me to shift my communication style a little bit and emphasize different things. So as an example, I used to emphasize what the firm said, what certain managers would say, make the opinion about someone with more authority than I had at the time, and that had more credibility. And so that really helps, because that was the truth, right? Those were the people that we were following, but it was them, and I was just communicating it versus me. Now, that was early on in my career. A lot's changed since then, but that took me a long time to kind of shift that around and work that into my communication style.
And you felt like that was still, you didn't feel like, and I think it's important to recognize that in doing so, you can borrow the content from others, be able to cite your sources, as it were, according to the partners of the company. It gives you authority for holding these, but you can still eventually turn them into your own interpretation and your own advice as well. Not just, well, the boss said X, so here it is.
No, you can't do that.
Right.
It has to be authentic, but there's a nuance there in the way you present an opinion, right? It's as you said, it's an expert's opinion. Here's how I see it, versus it's just me talking. There's a nuance there, but you still have to be authentic.
Tell me about that nuance. I want to poke in that area there. Give me some of the examples of how that nuance would sound, how it would manifest.
Sure. I mean, so you would use an example such as, manager X believes that, this is a great business to own. I agree, and here's why, right? You basically start with the premise that this expert that has, long-term credibility, a 30-year investor, has a belief in something. And then from my standpoint, when I go to communicate that, you sort of take that and I add my own spin to it. So the base premise is sort of proven, and then I make it authentic, and it is what I believe in. And so I think people hear that and can sort of buy in. Okay, it's not only this expert opinion, but the person that I know at a local level and trust that relationship, they believe the same thing and have expanded on it.
Yes. So, okay, everybody, that was a great example that he just mapped out as far as how to structure the beginning of some of those comments to get the foundation in, and to, I'm going to use the term in air quotes, to buy a little or borrow a little bit of credibility, as it were, and then establish your own from there. It's just a springboard, but it's a great tool, great strategy to use. Now, this brings us to our influence challenge of the day. So, Joe, this is your opportunity to talk directly to our audience and challenge them to take one step that they can complete in its entirety within 24 hours to have more influence. How would you like to challenge our audience today?
Well, I'll challenge myself.
Okay.
I think it's an elevator pitch. I think, it's so crucial and something that almost everybody can improve on. You just never know who you're going to meet in your daily life, professional life, just socially, formally, professionally. And someone says, what do you do? And it's the easiest question. It's a natural opening question. And people sort of fumble. They either talk too much, they don't say enough, they don't know how to answer it. And so to me, everybody can improve, me included, on how to make that more interesting and more impactful. So the elevator pitch. And I'll take that challenge on myself.
Nice. I love it. All right. We'll have you back to, or otherwise we'll get you to make a little recording and share it with us in another platform, or connect with us later on to share the upgrade. I think you used a really important word, both previously when we were discussing it offline, but also just now. And it's the word interesting. And I think a lot of people, and it seems to frequently with all the clients that I've worked with, be people who are often in financial services, accountants or others, where the perception is that the rest of the world thinks what you do is boring, or the fear or the assumption that, okay, well, I like what I do and that's why I do it, but nobody else is going to care. So there's almost this sheepishness or this almost apologetic tone to set the stage for whatever you're about to say. And I can't tell you the number of people I've worked with where they're like, well, but I'm just an analyst, or I'm just a this, or just and I always want to say, stop justifying this kind of self-deprecation. Look, self-deprecation has its place in humor and in whatever else. But if you're pitching, and I don't mean sales pitching, but elevator pitching, the whole idea is to give someone a quick little bait, a little taste of information that makes them say a wonderful little 3-word phrase in response. Not I love you, although that one's nice too, but just simply tell me more. Right? Just something to kind of pique their interest and want them to know more about you. And so I don't think it's about worrying whether or not your audience will think what you do for a living is interesting. What matters most is that it sounds like you do. Because, I mentioned to you earlier, Joe, that I love my accountant. And one of the things I love about working with him, if we are going to prepare taxes or do whatever else, is that he loves talking about tax accounting and whatever new legislation and whatever new ideas he has. Granted, my eyes glaze over sometimes, I will confess that, because numbers and taxes and taxes and numbers don't work in my brain that way. But I love the fact that he loves it, because that's exactly the person that I want to talk to more, that I want to hire. Why on earth would I want to hire a tax accountant who feels about taxes like I do? That would be the worst mistake ever. I mean, if you hate public speaking and you want to get better at it, you would come to me. You would not go to somebody else who feels like you do, hates public speaking, to get help on it. So, stop justifying the self-deprecation and just show people why you love what you do. So, all right, I'm done with my soapbox, Joe. Feel free to comment from there.
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, we do all feel that way, especially, again, coming back to the elevator pitch. When you're meeting someone, they're like, well, no one wants to talk about wealth management or investing. So, I mean, when you're thinking about that, yeah, I mean, you want to make it interesting. I love what I do. As I told you earlier, I get to meet fantastic people. It's really interesting. Every day is different. And, you want to communicate some of that enthusiasm to people, so they say, like you said, tell me more about that. And that's the opening where you can not overwhelm them, but, give them a little bit more detail and, keep going.
And it's nice to know. I love the response of tell me more, because your response right back to them can be about what specifically, like what part do it? Because like you just said a moment ago, there's that feeling, well, nobody wants to talk about wealth management. Okay, but they may want to talk about something else. So is it, you mentioned one of that you love the range of people you get to talk to. Great. Tell me more about that. What kind of people do you get to connect with? Those are interesting stories. And it doesn't have to be about tax tips. They're not looking to you for advice in this first conversation. They're just looking to get to know you as the person. And I think those are great stories to share.
Yeah, I agree. And I, as I said, we try and do that.
Yes. Terrific. Okay. So moving out of that 24-hour influence challenge, everybody go home, work on your elevator pitch, be ready to share it with the next person unapologetically, enthusiastically, show that you love what you do. From there, let's move on to communication and context. So let's talk about some mistakes, because much as we hate to admit it, we've all made them at some point or other. So tell me a story about a communication related mistake that you've made. And if you could have a do-over, what would it sound like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very common mistake. People in our industry or in any sort of complex sales role, everybody tries to deliver too much content too quickly. Not everybody, but it's a common mistake, and It's one that I made, and I made a lot early on in my career, and where you have this tendency to try and give as much information as possible, as quickly as possible. And I have a lot of good stuff to share, and let me tell you about all of them at once. And so what winds up happening is you wind up telling them nothing. They don't keep the key points. And so, I can remember I had a very big pitch meeting, prospect meeting, whatever you want to call it. And I was very excited to get in there and tell them all the great things that we could do for them, which I obviously really believed that we could be helpful to them. And I just wound up overwhelming them with information. And at the end, I knew that was the case, because in our follow-up, the questions that were asked were basically everything I'd already told them. And it was clear that the message was lost. Yes. And so my mistake, and it's been made a lot, is trying to deliver too much too soon, and not sort of summarizing the key points.
Yes. And I think that's what I like to call the expert's curse, that we know so much about our own unique industries, and it's all relevant to us, and it's all interesting to us, and it all helps us to make decisions, et cetera. So we want to share everything. It's really mostly done out of generosity and enthusiasm and wanting to over deliver. But there's a difference between over delivering and overwhelming. And I think that was a key phrase that you used, that you don't want to kind of open mouth, turn on fire hose and drown your audience, where they all they wanted was a sip of water and now they're drenched. So you definitely can't ingest all that comes at you like that. And similarly, your ears can't ingest that much content when it comes across as a barrage. So if you were to go back to some of those conversations that you've had that were very fire hose delivered, what would you do differently if you could have a do-over?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully I get a lot of do-overs. We do these kinds of meetings all the time. And so what I have done differently is I now start a meeting with here are the things that we want. If you remember nothing else, that you'll walk away with these key points, and you make it a few, 2, 3 at most. Here are the things we want you to remember about us. And then you go through the meeting, and it could go in various ways. You can get into the pit. And at the end, I say it again. Here are if you remember nothing else, here are the 3 things that we want you to take away from this meeting. And there are a couple of key points about, us as a firm, me, our, what we can do for them. And I actually then follow it up with an email. So when I say, a do-over. You can't go back in time and do it over, but you can start with the next one. And that's what I've done. And does it work every time? No, but I think it's much more effective. And the success rate has been way more doing that than just sort of going with a 100-page deck and just sort of saying, here's all the things we can do, instead of I now summarize it with a few key points.
Yes, that whole tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them adage does come back handy. Certain things just don't go out of style. And as long as if they help to simplify, it just helps it to stick. People aren't really good at remembering more than 2 or 3 things anyway.
Yes, that's right. So I literally say that here are the things that I want you to remember. And then here are the things I forget. And even still, you'd be surprised. Sometimes people don't remember.
Yeah. Yes. And they're definitely not going to remember if you give them more. So stick with the simple, definitely preface, let them look for it in the middle and remind them again at the end. And if you can do it in writing as well as a follow-up reminder, so much the better. That multimodality learning that we all have is something that should be leveraged, not fought, for sure. If you know that it's going to help somebody make sure that your message sticks, hey, use every tool in the toolbox. That's my philosophy.
That's right.
So what about some of the difficult conversations that we have? What's an example of a time when you had to share bad news or initiate a difficult conversation? Nobody likes those, but they are a natural part of everybody's world at some point or other. How did you handle it? Should you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our world, we have a lot of difficult conversations all the time. Market, particularly from an investment standpoint, markets go up, they go down. When it's down, it's never fun, and there are difficult conversations. And so, we had a recent example in March of 2020 where, with the pandemic coming on, the markets reacted very unfavorably in a very short period of time, historic short period of time. And so, that creates bad news. Fortunately, we did fine. Our strategies held up, but it's still not a fun time to be calling and saying, the market's down, your investments are down, and here's why. And so those are difficult conversations. They're not easy, but there are a couple things that I do, and I think are best practices. Picking up the phone is really important, right? There are certain conversations you can handle with an email, and then the bad news typically is much better with a phone call. And so everyone is a one-off phone call. Making sure you listen, talk, clearly state what's going on, and then most importantly, provide some context and a strategy of what we're going to do about it. And it's important to go into those conversations and share that. And so I can tell you, in March of 2020, I picked up the phone, I talked to every single client, talked about what was going on, and shared our strategy. And thankfully, this time it sort of ended pretty quickly. Pandemic's still going on, the markets recovered pretty quickly, and so that was obviously a help. But obviously, bad news in that short period of time, those were tough conversations. Every one of them was a one-off, and making sure that we talked to every person.
I would imagine that that's different. A lot of times when we think about crucial conversations, it's something like either a performance evaluation or a termination, or where you're going to have a conversation that someone isn't. You need to initiate an uncomfortable conversation that somebody may not see coming. Something like this is a very different situation where, look, if the markets tank, the world knows about it because it's all anybody's talking about. You can see the numbers, you see the graphs. There's no surprises involved. So, people, you may be making the call, but it could be because they've already left 17 voicemails for you. So you're just returning the call at this point. So they know it's coming. It's coming. It's just a matter of having to engage and having to have that conversation, not how to initiate in the sense of they have no idea what you're about to tell them. I mean, they obviously want to know how their portfolio is performing, et cetera. But it's a different situation when they're starting by saying, oh my gosh, what's happening? What do we do? That's a very different world for you.
Yeah, I would say that if you're waiting until someone calls you, it's too late. You want to make sure that we're out in front of it. And so I would tell you that it was important for me to make the call, not to wait. And so that I think is really important, particularly if there's bad news. You want to make sure that it's you that's initiating the call. I picked up the phone and said, I'm calling to talk about this. And and it also demonstrates the fact that we're on top of it, right? Because,
Yes.
we are. Most of the people in our industry would be. It's just, it's a little bit of a nuance, but if you're calling, it's making the difference in sort of waiting, getting a voicemail, and then calling back 2 days later when, anything could have changed in that period of time.
Yes, yes. Controlling the narrative, getting in front of it,
Yes.
showing that you're not running away from it. I think that's the first responder, first mover is always a good position to be in strategically. So what about the virtual world? You mentioned, okay, we've set up the notion of the pandemic, which kicked in, gosh, a couple of years ago now, and we're still dealing with it. Over all that time, how has your virtual presence improved? And what do you think would help you help your team to be even more effective engaging with clients here in the virtual?
Boy, that what a great question. I would say that Zoom, obviously it's sort of cliche, everybody does it, but we're doing this on Zoom, right? You
Yep.
need to have presence. And so I have spent in our Brown Brothers, Harriman, our team, we've spent a lot of time thinking about, our Zoom presence, how we're conducting client meetings, the background. I'm sitting in my office in Philadelphia with the skyline behind me, but, I'm not always doing that. Sometimes I'm in my basement, and, what image am I presenting when I'm talking and having these client conversations over Zoom? So I think that from a virtual presence standpoint, forget about LinkedIn and all that. I mean, that's important too, but my day-to-day interactions are over Zoom, and this is what clients are seeing. They're seeing my background, how I'm dressed, what's going on, the noises that are in the background, and all of that's important. I would tell you early on, as an aside, I shunned, I have a 6, 4, and a 2-year-old, and there was a lot of noise in the house trying to have these difficult conversations. And I would tell you that, a lot of the clients, they would run in, and it was almost endearing in that way. And that
The clients or the kids would run in?
The client, the kids, the kids. But yeah, originally you were tempted to sort of say, stay out of here, lock the door. And, it was just a part of life. Everybody was dealing with it. Clients had dogs walk in, I had kids walk in, and it just was sort of where we were. So as much as we tried to make a professional, we were all going through it together. And so I think sort of just being authentic and, having that presence was something we all struggled with.
Yes. Yes. I think if I had $1 for every animal tail that I saw walking across a computer screen in front of the camera at some point or other, the cat's walking along the keyboard, or a dog nose sticking its way into the iPad lens, et cetera. It's really humanizing in a lot of ways. Has been, I mean, there's limits, of course, to everything, but it certainly has added an entertainment value to being in the virtual world, say the least for me. Now, what about succession planning? When you think about people coming up through the ranks and preparing the future generations of leadership, and even for you moving ahead, if you've heard advice along the way, what is something that would otherwise disqualify or delay the potential for an internal candidate to take a higher level leadership role? And what would they have to do to fix the problem?
Yeah, I mean, there's countless examples that I've seen over the years. I mean, I think you have to first start out that people have to be qualified, right? So I'll make the assumption
of course,
that various candidates all have the base technical skills, but
right.
Particularly, the higher up you go and you advance in organizations, it becomes inherently more subjective. The number of positions are limited. As you go up the ranks, who's going to get them is inherently a judgment call.
Sure.
Considering if everybody else is equally technically qualified, and so. I think it sounds pretty simple, but attitude is a big, having a positive attitude, being a positive force around the office, communicating with, all different stakeholders, that adds up. And I have seen, examples of people that are very technically strong, but just had poor attitudes and it could be about anything. It was either, overly focused on their own promotion or just not interested in engaging with others. And, it is clearly delayed their advancement. And so that's not a comment about anybody specific. That goes over many years. But to me, having a very positive attitude and being a positive force around, it actually buys you a lot. And so I think that's a key for anybody coming up, is to be have a very positive attitude around the office.
Attitude. Yes. What you say, how you say it, who you engage with, and what you share, all the things that change it. I think the attitude is almost especially at the upper levels, it's a bigger indicator of what the corporate culture is going to be like, because culture starts at the top and rolls its way down. So if that's what you are projecting, and that's what you're telling indirectly your direct reports, that is what you appreciate, then negative attitude of one way, shape, or form, then they're going to follow in your footsteps, because hey, it's what it took for you to get to the top. So, or higher up at least. So to have them then emulating you, thinking it's what you want, I would imagine that would be a dangerous place to be.
Well, and also, I mean, you see it in that there's a little bit of an attitude. Well, I went through it, so you have to too.
The hazing experience.
And I think that a lot of that's changing. I think, it's a very tight labor market. There's a very big demand for talent. And I think that attitude has really gone out the window. And I think now it's more about how can we encourage people, move them up, give them what they need to build their careers, and empower them. And I think that's a big focus. It's not just here at Brown Brothers, but it is everywhere. All the competitors that I talk to, it's the same struggle.
Yes. So now we've talked about people going to the top of the career ladder. Let's talk about those who are just starting out on the first rung. Finally, if you were asked, I should say, to give the commencement address at a high school graduation ceremony, what advice would you give the graduates, whether or not they go to college, regardless of career goals or majors? What's the one thing you'd tell them they have to do to be successful?
I mean, not to be repetitive, but have a positive attitude. It's incredibly important, and it will propel you very far. You have to be technically good, but a good attitude is probably the most important thing.
So I'm going to poke a little deeper on that. I want you to be specific for me. You're talking to a bunch of 18-year-olds. So what does positive attitude actually mean? Is it just like always pretending to be happy?
No, because that could be inauthentic, right? If there's bad news and you're always happy, that doesn't work.
So how do you tell an 18-year-old what it means to have a positive attitude?
Yeah, early on, say yes. Open yourself up to experiences, have a positive attitude about trying new things. That's personally and in the office. Make sure that you're constantly learning and being exposed to different things. That's having a positive attitude. It's not just being fake happy all the time. It's saying, I'm here to learn. I want to do as much as I can, and saying yes to a lot. To me, that's what it's all about.
I love it. Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. How can people learn more about you and Brown Brothers Harriman?
Sure. bbh.com is the company website. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can search for me, Joseph Chott. And my email is joseph.chott@bbh.com. So happy to engage with anyone or follow up.
Terrific. Thank you once again for joining and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thanks, Laura. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
And to everybody else out there, thank you for tuning in. As always, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes so we can help even more people increase their confidence, presence, and influence. And finally, if you want to download my free guide to equipment recommendations for virtual influence, including my picks for microphones, lights, and more, go to speakingtoinfluence.com. I'm Dr. Laura Sicola, and you're listening to Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Laura Sicola, and I want to sincerely thank you for listening to the Speaking to Influence podcast. If you love listening to these episodes as much as I love bringing them to you, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And please go to iTunes right now to rate and review our podcast in order to help us expand our reach so even more people can master the 3 C's to command the room, connect with the audience, and close the deal.
Thanks for listening to Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite, the show for leaders who want to speak with impact. The hosts, producers, owners, and media distributors of the show make no guarantees that the strategies and information discussed will result in profit or other success and may result in losses. The opinions and statements of the hosts and guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the owners, staff, managers, broadcasters, or sponsors of the show. No medical or psychological therapy or personal or professional wellness or relationship advice is offered in the show. You are advised to seek counsel on matters related to your health, family, relationships, job, or other business and legal matters from licensed advisors in those areas prior to making any changes in business or lifestyle. No information provided may be suitable in your situation. As always, take responsibility for the decisions and actions you take, including the reactions they may make in your work, family, health, and life.